Welcome, everyone, to our Whole Lives Taking Flight, and we have a delightful program for you here today. My name is Reverend Amy Johnson, and I serve as Minister for Sexuality Education and Justice in the United Church of Christ. And I am joined by two amazing colleagues today. Melanie.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Melanie Davis, the Unitarian Universalist Association's Our Whole Lives Program Manager. I'm so excited to see all the geolocation coming through in the chat. Welcome, everybody. I know we're going to grow in numbers as we go. And our delightful guest this morning is our esteemed colleague and friend, Heather Corinna. Heather, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Heather Corinna. I'm the founder of Scarleteen.com. I'm also the author of a couple sex education books for young people and a menopause book for older people. My pronouns are they, them.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Heather. We're just so excited to have you here for this webinar. And I want to give a couple logistical pieces here before we jump in. One is that if you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We have a bunch of folks on today, and it's much easier for us to keep track of your questions and make sure they get answered if you use the Q&A. Um, and I know many of you are chiming in with where you're coming in from today in the chat. So just welcome from all over the country. So many folks. We're excited to have you here today. And it is June. It is Pride Month in lots and lots of places. And I know that I posted recently that I'm just so keenly aware, particularly this year, it's every year, but particularly this year, that pride is so much more than waving a flag. And that there is so much going on right now that is really important for us to be aware of. That might seem like it's in the background for some people, but it's really not for a lot of us. So we're gonna jump right in, Heather, and talk about what fresh hell is this? The erasure of identity. So please jump right in.
Sure. I mean, we were talking right before we opened this up that this is maybe not one of the most fun conversations probably we'll have. It's hard and it's scary. It's really scary right now. It's always a little weird to go into Pride Month when, part of you is excited and you want to be joyful and it's nice and it usually feels good. At the same time, I mean, just as an example, I have this kind of dichotomy going here where I'm a little more excited to go to Pride because I know it will be less corporate than usual, but it will
Mm,
only be less corporate than usual because corporations have divested from Pride by way of divesting from DEI. I like that it's less corporate than usual, hopefully. I really don't like why.
yeah.
That's the case, right? And so I think we're in a moment right now where we're kind of sitting with a lot of things. I was saying also in an email to the two of you the other day that, when you look at statistics right now, of queer and trans people from the 70s. There's just more and more and more and more and more of us. And again, at the same time that there are more and more and more of us, we see less and less and less of us. For as much as we're present, there's equal amounts, if not greater amounts of backlash to our presence. And so again, it's one of those things where you're like, yay, there's so many of us. And then at the same time, that also means right now that there are so many more of us who are scared, who are suffering, who aren't sure what's going to happen to us, to members of our community.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm always struck by this idea that when people say, well, why are there so many more of them now? And it's like, well, when you have role models, when you see people who are visible, then you can say, oh, that's who I am too. It's not that they're suddenly being created out of whole cloth. It's that there's, it's that whole argument that people being visible will cause someone else to be something
Mhm.
is so damaging.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, absolutely.
And also, I mean, my local church had the amazing privilege last Sunday to have a woman on who had lived in New York and was who had was walking home from work and walked right into the Stonewall riots. And she had this just amazing story. But part of it was that, she wasn't out. So, there were a lot of people. She was, the first woman to serve on this and that, and they're like, don't say anything. So, I mean, I think there's also the idea that, you know, people have always been who they are. They just
Mhm.
haven't always been able to be out. And then I think one of the really scary things right now is that people who have felt the support of infrastructure and policies and laws and felt that support to be able to come out are now in danger,
Hmm.
in physical
Right,
danger. Yeah.
right. And we all know that there's safety in numbers, right? So, I mean, again, we see this incline because we have had building blocks, right? Up until relatively recently. Obviously, the trajectory has been a whole lot of up and down and up and down, but for a couple of decades there, that for as much as the down went, we'd kind of bump up a little bit higher. And so, of course, you see more and more of us, you feel safer. We can feel when there are more of us around. We can feel when there are more of us made visible. And also, too, groups like this administration know that. People like J.K. Rowling know that. And that's part of why they're doing the things that they're doing and reacting the way that they're reacting, because they know that when we see more of us and that when we have laws and policies that protect us, that we do feel more able to come out. And they don't want us to come out, right? Because
Hmm.
we challenge the status quo much too much when we do that.
Oh, I mean, yeah, and I think even like we challenge the status quo, we challenge the patriarchy, we challenge the white cis heteronormative
Mhm.
patriarchy, which really, in the grand scheme of the entire world, is not the majority.
No.
It's just not. But we like to think it is. Or I don't like to think it is, but
Sure.
people
Well,
are,
I think it's comparable to the economic situation that we find ourselves in, right? In which the 1% is only the 1%,
right.
but the 1% has the majority of economic power, right?
Right.
And it's a very similar thing here with, the most powerful cishet people who have the most influence are, again, such a tiny number of people, right? And that also discounts the wide array of cishet people that don't want to have all of the power, that do
Yeah.
want to be
Yeah.
inclusive, that do want for everyone to have the same rights and to have real equity. But again, it's that tiny fraction of people with all of the power and all of the money. Um,
So
Yeah.
this might,
I just, oh, I
I
was
was
just,
going to say this might be a good time to go back to some definitions,
that's exactly what I was
because
going to do.
we're using cis het, we're using queer, we're using non-binary, and our guests watching this now and in the stream have very different levels of lived experience and professional experience or understanding or just general know-how. So if we could maybe start with some definitions of the terms that we'll be using or have been using, I think that would be helpful. Would you like to kick that off, Heather?
Sure, I can do that. I mean, I will kick it off by saying any terms that are identity terms, we can only defined so universally because they're personal, right? I mean, that's
Hmm.
the whole point about identity. Identity is personal and identity is highly diverse and highly individual. And what trans or queer means to me is not the same as what it means to somebody else. But overall, generally what we mean and both of these are big buckets. When I use these terms, I'm using them as very, very large umbrellas under which a lot of different things fit. Under queerness can fit both gender and orientation, for instance. And it generally just pretty much means anybody that doesn't pretty strictly identify as the sex they were assigned at birth, or kind of sees the way that that sex, or I mean, it's assigned sex, but it functionally in this world works as assigned gender, whether we like that or not, sees or feels that differently than is generally kind of commonly understood. Um, and with trans, it's really similar. It's anybody that doesn't really feel like they match what's expected of them in terms of the sex that they were assigned. Again, queerness can be orientation, right? So queerness includes gay and lesbian people. It includes bisexual and pansexual people. It includes people, like me, who none of those things work, because as a non-binary person, all of those binary ways of identifying orientation don't necessarily work for me. That includes asexuality. Uh, Under the trans umbrella, right? That can be anything from people who are binary trans people, people who are agender like me, who again, I just don't feel, it's just not in me. I just
Mhm.
don't feel it. People who are gender fluid, people who are two-spirit. Um, but it's, again, these are things that you really have to ask the person using the term how they define it for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were using cis het, so het being heterosexual, cis being cisgender, generally meaning that the sex you were assigned at birth syncs up as society expects it to with the body that you have. So that's another term that we use. I think in your email to us we mentioned pansexuality too. That's another term that can be confusing to people. So that to me that's like looking for, being attracted to a person regardless of the body that they have or the identity that they hold or their orientation that they have, but that might mean something different for somebody else.
hmm And sometimes it's not about necessarily about embodiment, right? Like I think a
Mhm.
lot of the time when the frameworks that we have to talk about things like gender dysphoria, right, which is just feeling discomfort in your gender, is automatically tied to bodies. And for some people, that's true, right? Which is why for some people, medical transition will provide a lot of ease. For other people, again, people like me, I don't have gender dysphoria in my body because, again, I don't experience gender, but I will have dysphoria if somebody looks at my body and decides that they can decide what my gender is based on
Mhm.
what my body looks like.
Mhm.
Like surgery wouldn't change anything for me
Right.
because people would still assume that that I have gender.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the way that we, I mean, there's a whole like we could go down a very, very interesting, and I think people do even get degrees in the idea of like gender being totally constructed,
Right.
right? And but I think like going back to this term assigned sex at birth, I know some people kind of go around that. And I think that it's so important for us to realize that that actually does happen, that it really actually does. People are born, and this is a little simplified, but not actually that much. Someone's born, and a medical professional looks at the external genitalia and
Very quickly,
very
very
quickly
quickly.
and makes a decision and says it's a boy or it's a girl. Or if there is something that looks like, oh my gosh, this might not be within the very, very broad range of what science has decided. Scientists somewhere in a room, most likely a bunch of white men from European descent, decided what the parameters would be, that if it's within this, we will call this male. If it is within this, we will call this female. If there's any doubt about that, then there might be some further testing, and there's a very small percentage of people who might be assigned or diagnosed with some intersex traits. And even when that is true, it is almost always that that person will still be assigned male or female.
Mhm.
And it's not legal in the vast majority of states in the United States to put anything else but male or female on a birth certificate, even if someone is diagnosed with intersex traits. So I think that's really important for us to say that we really are assigned a sex at birth. And like you said, Heather, then in our society, right, that comes with a whole bunch of assumptions about what our gender will be.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what we talked a little bit about the intersection with our whole lives and um, the youth that we intersect with and interact with, trans non-binary youth, families with trans non-binary relatives, parents, people in our congregations, organizations. Um, can you talk a little bit more about some of the things that are at stake right now with all this? I'm gonna call it nonsense. It's just way more serious than nonsense. With all
Yeah, I would say intentional cruelty
yeah,
would, yeah.
the erasure that's going on.
Oh, I mean, gosh, where to begin? Where to begin? I mean, I was just thinking as you were talking, I was thinking over it's been 26 years that I've been running Scarleteen now. And I was thinking that I feel like I've seen a growing trend, whereas in the 2000s, and the kind of early 2010s, I felt like I kept seeing more and more young queer and trans people are just questioning, young questioning people. The way that they would come in when they were questioning was less fearful and more just confused, right? Kind of figuring out, how do I feel about this? What are the right words that feel like the right words for me? Is the way that I'm identifying meaningful to me? Is it going to project what I want it to project to other people? And certainly for some of those young people that were in homes or communities that were not particularly safe, in which there was bias and bigotry, obviously, we saw more fear. But I feel like, particularly over the last 10 years, one of the trends that I'm seeing are more and more young people coming in saying, I'm so scared that I'm queer or I'm trans and I don't want to be, right? And that, I mean, just when you think about the many implications of that, right? What does that mean? If you're fearful of the person that you're becoming around things that you don't have a choice. I mean, first of all, you are living in fear all of the time, which is terrible for everyone. It's terrible for our mental health. It's terrible for our physical health. It's terrible for our cultures and communities. It's bad. It's very hard to envision a happy future for yourself if you're afraid of what you're becoming. It's very hard to get to know yourself if you're starting to build a wall to say, well, I can be this thing, but if it feels at all like I'm any of the things behind this wall, I need to find a way to not be that thing, right? Which again is also a particularly complicated thing around things in which we don't get to decide this about ourselves. We can decide how we can present, we can decide how we talk about ourselves, but we can't decide how we feel. That's out of our control. Um, if you're afraid, you're talking to fewer and fewer people, right? I can only assume that for all of the young people that come and say those things to us, there's at least as many that are so afraid they won't even risk saying that out loud to another person. Because once you're afraid, you don't know who's safe anymore, right? And when we're literally reading the writing on the wall. We're reading the paper in the morning. We're seeing what's in the news. That message, it's made very clear that no, we're not safe right now anymore. And that, I mean, the number of things I feel like we've also been hearing kind of more and more people say things like, I really want a family when I get older. I want a house and I want a partner and I want kids, but I can't picture that. If it's, let's say it's a young woman talking, I can't picture that with another woman. And that's something that we were also talking about in email before this, right? Is that the thing that I think most of us know about so many things that if you can't if you have no visions of your future, or they're harder and harder to find, or you're in a place where you're just seeing less and less of them, and then places like books and online and media and what's taught in your college are more and more limited. If you can't see visions of what a future could be for you in somebody else's life, it's very hard to envision it for yourself.
You know, Heather, we didn't start by explaining what Scarleteen
Oh,
is.
sorry. Sure.
But so maybe we can, you know, you can describe that for people. But my question is, I know you have expanded the services over the years that you offer. Is that in response to this increasing fear, or was that a natural growth of young people's curiosity about sex?
Sure. Well, I mean, let me just kind of long story short what
Mhm.
Scarleteen is. Scarleteen was one of the first online resources for sex and relationships education for young people. It was absolutely the first one to be inclusive. It's the first one to be by queer people, trans people, gender non-conforming people that I know of. A lot of what Scarleteen is static content, right? So articles, so many articles. And then lots of advice columns. And early on, Scarleteen launched in 1998. And by the end of 2000, we'd added a message board. We still use a message board. And over the years, we added more and more direct services. And some of that is to keep up with technology. You know, we have a text line because working on phones and texting for help is something that people did. But I mean, really, some of what it is that you are hard pressed outside of something like in Our Whole Lives class, for instance, even in a lot, what school sex ed there is, even when it's good, to have the opportunity as a young person to actually talk to another person about sex and relationships. It's always so funny when people will ask us, well, what other sites like Scarleteen can we go to? There's really not that many. If you go to look online, there's like five sex ed sites, really comprehensive sex ed sites, and none of the rest of them have direct services where there's not AI involved,
Mhm.
which we don't use because also we think that people deserve to talk to other human.
Bless you for that.
And also too, I mean, again, as anybody involved with Al knows, sex ed and relationships education is nuanced. It's not it's one thing to use AI to figure out how to fix your toilet. It's something else to try and use it to fix your relationship, uh,
Right.
or something that feels broken in your body. Um, and so, the direct services, a lot of it is again the opportunities for young people, particularly queer and trans young people, to feel like they have safe people that they can talk to, that they can ask anything. I mean, because I think this is maybe a little to the side of what we're talking about, but not too much to the side, is I also feel like in this environment right now, more and more adults are scared of talking to young people about any of these things than they have been before. So even finding those adults who are willing to have those conversations becomes harder and harder in real life. Again, in sex ed classes, I mean, a lot of sex ed teachers in schools aren't even allowed to have conversations outside the curriculum or outside class. So if you went up to your sex ed teacher after class and said, hey, can you answer this question to me? A lot of them would say no, some out of fear, some because they've been told to say no by
Yeah.
the administration of the school where they're working.
And increasingly, and I know our some of our ALF facilitators are afraid of, you know, we're holding on to freedom of religion and we're offering this in that kind of setting. But I just want people to know who aren't familiar with your site that unlike a lot of advice columns and information sites, you give such personal and in-depth responses to people that I think that must offer a feeling of safety that they can't get out because it's not your answers are not like two sentences long. What do
Mm-mm.
you write? 1,200 words sometimes.
I mean, look, well, some of it is when it's me, I'm a wordy human being, but still. But also too, again, it's nuanced, right? Like, and I think, also part of the increased direct service is that, you know, social media can be everything from really, really great to really, really terrible in every number of ways. But also, social media, even though there's more and more sex information there, is often a particularly poor vehicle for sex information because you really only have room to do things in very tiny bits of text. One of the things that we recently did, one of the ways that, I mean, Scarleteen started because people started sending emails to me to answer them. And that's always been our model. I started in Montessori, so it's very Montessori oriented. Um, and so the content that we do is not, we don't write the content that we do because we got an NIH grant to write about this topic. We pick the topics that we write about based on what young people tell us they need. So a recent example of this, for instance, is that we have had this wave of young people coming to us convinced that they were perpetrators of child-on-child sexual abuse by
Mm.
virtue of there being a wave of social media that's really truncated, defining what that is to the point that it's so vague as to be meaningless and is just putting people in a panic. There's no contextual conversation around it about early childhood sexuality or anything like that. And so you just, and I'm sure that everyone providing that information is well intended. I want to be really clear about that. It's not, nobody's being diabolical. It's not like that. But it's just in tiny sound bites and small bullet lists. This is not the work for that. It's
Yeah.
all complex, it's all multi-layered, it's all intersexual. It's all, like you said, Melanie, very personal.
Yeah. Amy, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I think also, this idea of like who's trusted, right? And Scarleteen is such a trusted resource. And I think I'm just going to say I have some really mixed feelings right now about a lot of posts on social media saying, you're safe with me. And I think that my personal feeling about that is that I don't get to decide that for you.
Mhm.
You get to decide that about me. You get
Mhm.
to decide if I'm safe or not. And that doesn't happen in a heartbeat. You can't know that just because I posted something on social media. That takes a relationship. It either takes a relationship. That's one of the reasons like why we're so adamant about the amazing, amazingness of OWL, right? Of our whole lives is that it creates an environment where trusted relationships can be built and people can see what that sounds like and feels like in their bodies and looks like. And Scarleteen, I mean, there's a question in the Q&A about what other sites. Well, there's some others that are, medically accurate, generally speaking, and do a good job with facts. But Scarleteen is different. Like you said, like there's a lot of really personal attention and nuance there that means that it's a trusted resource for so many people. And what a tension, right? Like what a great thing it is that we have that. And how frustrating and sad is it that we don't have more of that in person, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Heather, what do you say? Like we have a lot of people here who are our facilitators, program organizations, people outside in other settings. When you hear young people and particularly, being afraid of who they are, or feeling unsafe in the world, how can we offer assistance there? How can we create or help them feel more comfortable in who they are when they're absolutely right. They are
Mhm.
not necessarily safe.
Well, I think that's often the best place to start, right? It's always going to be different because everybody's fears are going to be different again. Everybody's intersections are going to be different, right? Like everybody's actual safety is going to be different. I was talking to somebody else the other day. I've only in my life, except for a really tiny chunk in my early childhood, lived in three of the four most progressive states in the union. Right. So as a queer and genderqueer person growing up in Chicago, I was out I was not worried for my safety, not around that, around my body, around other things for sure, but not around that. And, the same person, the same age, growing up the same way in the middle of rural Alabama had a very different experience than me. Even the same person growing up in Chicago, some people I dated who were Black people instead of white people had a very different experience than me. And so, it depends on who it is. But I think what you just said, I mean, part of that is what do we do when people have feelings? We validate the feelings that we have. I hear that you're afraid. I understand why you're afraid. It's really scary right now. You're right, right? Because I think that's also one of the things that happens, especially when you hear from people who are not at all supportive of queer and trans people or who are not exactly full-throated in their support. It's a little gaslighting, right? Is that you'll hear some people be like, "What are you so afraid of? Everyone is fine," right? Or they'll minimize what it is. Like, why is it such a big deal that somebody uses your right pronouns? Which, one, it is a big deal, but also even kind of going somewhere there that is less of a big deal than say, why is it a big deal if someone takes away all of your rights as a human being, right? Because this is also happening concurrently with people not using right pronouns. So I think, and asking, what are the things that you're afraid of? We try and help young people identify what systems of support they have, especially in person, and usually that's us kind of going through a list with them because a lot of them will say there's nobody, right? Because they feel like there's nobody. And sometimes, sadly, unfortunately, there really is nobody. But more times than not, if we say, if you'll give us a minute, let's talk about who some of those people can be, right? If not your immediate family, how about your extended family? Especially as the black sheep of my family, I'm always like, is there maybe an aunt or uncle that isn't around very often, but you know that we're related, right? I mean, it's like, it's not that hard to find the queer trans person in your family because usually you don't see them very much if the rest of your
Mm.
family is not there. I saw the black sheep unite by all means.
Amen.
Or we'll say, are you in school? If you're in school, are there any teachers that you feel particularly safe with, you feel some kind of affinity with? Obviously, is there a GSA in your school or some other, basically, queer trans supportive group there? How about medical providers? How about your neighbors? I mean, you really can kind of keep going down the line. And sometimes if you can just even find somebody, one person, that's a
Mhm.
big deal. Another, another conversation that we'll have is that it's different to feel afraid when you're a minor in a household or community that isn't inclusive and you can't go anywhere else. So sometimes it's trying to get people to like, we just need to get you to where you can get out of here. So what are the kind of strategies that we can make? What's the kind of support that we can give you while you're living in this, and there's not really a lot that you can do to be supported or change things. And for us, that's things like check-ins. We tend to pay attention to our users that are having a really hard time, and if we haven't heard from them or in a month, we'll try and dip back in and just be like, is everything okay? Are you all right? Connecting them with each other when you can. I mean, that's the other thing I think obviously, I didn't really mean to do the work that I do online. It's just, it was the only affordable way to do it. And of course, it affords us a really giant international audience, right? It's something it's not accessible to everyone, but it's more accessible than most things. But for one of the downsides of life online, I think, is that a lot of younger people haven't been learning how to build community themselves. So
Yeah.
that's another thing we can help them with is to be like, actually, this person that was talking, this thing you're saying right now, this person in this thread was talking about this the other day, right? So even if it's just in small ways showing them how to do it, it's applicable to the rest of their lives. Giving them resources, but like you said in email, Melanie, that's tricky right now, right? Like I can even say, I have a couple of books. You can go find them at the library. Can they? Can they find them at the library? Because my books get pulled from libraries all of the time. So it depends on the library that you're at. Can you find them at the bookstore? Will your parents or somebody even buy them for you? So resources are great, but in this moment, it is also becoming trickier to connect people with resources. It's even yesterday I was in a meeting with our person at Scarleteen who looks for grants, who was saying we are just at a standstill for grants because no one is giving grants to sex ed now. It's just no one wants to do it in this environment. So when you think about things like that, right, we are going to see fewer and fewer and fewer resources.
Yeah, not for nothing, but Scarleteen is donor funded. So if if people want to donate and make
Yeah.
that gift.
I think too, like the idea of grants and I think that many of us don't realize how much grant funding is affecting and is going to affect so many things in our world. I was talking to somebody the other day who was like, "Oh yeah, my sister does that's what she does. She gets grants for libraries, right? And she doesn't have any work right now because there's not grants for libraries either. And one of
Right,
them,
libraries, specific health care,
Yes.
mental health care. I mean, like, oh yeah, no, it's not just sex ed. The list is growing.
but it's all intersectional, right? Like, and one of the things was that oh, thank you for putting the contribute Scarleteen link in the chat, Kira.
Here, thank you, Corinna.
Um, like she lost an opportunity, or there's a grant opportunity that was no longer available just because one of the libraries was in a prison. So there's just so many like
Mhm,
little, like it's so like
mhm.
precise excavating of opportunities and a um a real intentional erasure, like we were talking.
Well, right. And some of it is even if you don't know the connection, you won't even see what's happening. For instance, cutting funding to the arts cuts the ability to have queer and trans community because that is where a lot of us live and breathe, right? That is where, I mean, ask any person, queer person who was a theater kid in high school, how they found the other queer kids at school, and they're going to be like, because they were the other theater
Yeah.
kids in high school. So if there's no longer theater in high school, and there's not a GSA in high school, and everyone's afraid to be out, how are you even finding your community anymore?
Yeah. So the title of today's program has "What Fresh Hell is this?" And this is Heather's book about perimenopause and perimenopause, menopause, and other indignities and you. It's a fabulous book. Um, which if we swing to the other side of the lifespan, and we talk about healthcare disparities, Heather runs the All Gender Menopause Support. Is that the name? All Gender Menopause and Perimenopause Support Group on Facebook, which is a wonderfully diverse community of people either going through perimenopause and menopause or who have perhaps some medical or sex ed advice. And the support that you offer is, and that your participants in that community offer, is way beyond what people can usually get from their healthcare providers
Mm.
because there just isn't a lot of research on trans folks and what happens when you're going through hormonal changes and aging bodies. Can you speak a bit about the healthcare disparities?
Sure. I mean, oh gosh. I mean, menopause, a lot like breast cancer, is deeply pinkwashed. And so while it's still one of these areas where I don't think there's any group of people for whom there's enough information. There's certainly, if you are white, straight, have some money, able, there's a lot more information for you because there's a lot more studies that have included you than there are otherwise. I mean, in fact, when I was researching that book, so many studies on menopause will talk about women, but would try and claw back in the study to be like, okay, what do they mean? Do they mean people that identify as women, or are they just assigning gender to sex? Nowhere in the study will there have even been, it was just assumed that everyone
Mm.
was women because they were there talking about menopause. There's not a question on the study to say, how do you identify your gender? It was just, it's obviously people with these body parts, therefore we're going to do this thing. Um, and so obviously that leaves an enormous amount of people out. That leaves intersex people out. That leaves people out who, for instance, and this is something we'll see all the time in that group, who are using testosterone for gender affirmation and want to know how all of this works, right? Like, do you want to do hormone therapy with estrogen if you're doing gender affirming testosterone therapy? And again, I mean, the good news is that with a lot of this stuff, trans healthcare providers actually have a lot more of this information sometimes than menopause providers. I mean, if you want a pro tip from me, actually, and you want a really good hormone doctor, don't, no matter your gender, talk to a trans health provider. It's not a standard issue matter, but you heard it here, but don't, don't put me on blast elsewhere.
I
Um,
would just say I have the utmost respect for hormones in general and life.
but also, this is one of these things where, what Melanie's like alluding to a little bit is, much like right now, we are seeing fewer and fewer people go into medical school for abortion care.
Mhm.
We are now starting to see fewer and fewer people go into medical school for LGBTQ healthcare, right? And so we're going to feel that. We already feel it right now because there's never been enough providers anyway, and there's not a lot of intersection in medical land. There just isn't, period. But again, if you see the writing on the wall that says, oh, you're not going to get funded, there's not going to be a job for you, you're not going to be able to, I think about people who are going in to medical school as researchers, right? And they're right away, they're being told that this research isn't going to be funded, so we're not going to have that specialized information. I mean, the good news is that for now, uh, we can still do things like have mutual aid community care and education groups so that we can educate each other. I'm also a chair at Our Bodies Ourselves, and Our Bodies Ourselves, which is kind of the OG model for community uh, knowledge sharing around healthcare, still exists. We can still do things like this. We may need to be doing more and more things like this, especially during
Yeah.
times like these. And some of that too, I mean, it's almost interesting because that goes back to what you were saying, Amy, even about trust building, right? You have people that will come, and we see this in menopause. Menopause is rife with expertitis. Everybody and their uncle is a menopause expert because they say that they're one. But that's the same thing as saying, I'm a safe person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
exactly.
an expert, I'm a safe person, when really what it should be is, well, we're going to build some trust and
Yeah.
you're going to do your work and we're going to see how that bears out over time. Um, but we, the group that we have, for instance, is private. I wouldn't dare have a group that was, included a whole bunch of trans people talking about menopause in a public space in Facebook. For one, half of what we said would be blocked. But then everyone would be harassed.
Yeah. And they, they, when people, some people might make light of, well, what's the matter? You're older, and it's like, well, the trauma of relying on testosterone and then being told, well, you'll get better if all you do is take estrogen. It's like, and that's not something that we can make light of. And if
Well, I mean, it's
and the other
hey,
way around too, people
right.
take estrogen, yeah.
Right. Well, and like, look, I mean, even as somebody, I grew up in and out of hospitals because my mom was a single mom who was a nurse, and they used to let kids just run rampant around hospitals in the 70s. They don't do that anymore. This is probably for the best. But and even as someone writing a menopause book, I wound up getting very little specialized care for menopause because every time that I wanted to have a medical appointment, I had to sit and be misgendered the entire time. And that's one of these things where you do the calculus to be like, is the care that I get for my physical health worth the toll that it takes on my mental health? And again, if we have fewer and fewer healthcare providers that are going to be getting education about transgender and queer people, if we have fewer and fewer studies on our health needs and our health disparities, this is going to happen more and more, and even more to the point, if we have a larger and larger culture of intolerance that says things, and gives us the clear message that we're just a pain in the butt. Like that we're just making everything difficult for everybody by asking to be considered in the same way that anybody else is considered. Then also too, we get sicker and sicker. And that is actually I mean, the two groups of people that not getting healthcare impacts the most are young people and older people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. We do have a few questions in our Q&A. Um, I want to address those and make sure we get to those. One of them is, which are the other sex ed sites you feel are inclusive and medically accurate? And I would say, again, like there are many options out there, and Scarleteen, I just want to say, is in a category by itself, really. But we have done work with Amaze and Advocates for Youth. They have a lot of really great resources. They strive to be inclusive and medically accurate. So those are definitely some sites that I would say. Do either of you want to add anything to that?
Well, Amaze has fabulous videos,
Yeah.
but not the kind of personal involvement that that people can get elsewhere. Advocates for Youth has some good resources for like facilitators, for background information for parents. That can be good. We can't rely. We used to be able to refer people to the CDC and the NIA. We can't do that anymore
Yeah,
because
the
the
World
really
Health
good.
Organization is pretty much, yeah. I mean, we've always done that. I mean, that's the other thing too, right? This isn't the only time we've seen this happen.
Yeah.
And when people even ask that question about other sites, in my tenure of doing this, can think of so many things that have come up, that have launched and had the possibility to be great, great. But again, it's so hard to sustain right now, right? And it's not about anybody not doing a good job. It's if you can't pay the bills and you can't get paid, or you have to, the first 10 years that I did Scarleteen, I had to work other jobs, not just to support myself, but to support Scarleteen. We're not going to have those resources.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes even when you're like, ooh, it's this great one, you go to put it in the next day and it's gone. I mean, I
Yeah.
think the other tricky thing is that there is actually some good sex ed on social media, but it's very hard to find. People are misspelling words all of the time to try and evade filters, which of course they
Yeah.
just pick up the next time. I really want to ask everyone here to stop doing that, please. And but even if you find a feed that you're like, oh, there's some really good stuff here, it can be gone. It can be gone because, we've had some really good educators volunteer with us that had great platforms, for instance, but then they got banned so much that they're like, it's just not worth it for me to do the effort to do my work because my work just gets hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah, and initially, many years ago, it was some legislation called Sesta Fosta that put like the browsers were responsible for the content, and so that booted a lot of sex educators offline.
Mhm.
And initially, people thought, well, it's just the sex workers. Well, that's like the canary in the coal
I
mine.
was just going to say that. It always is. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And now, it's not just the, Meta, anything owned by Meta is strictly censoring
Oh yeah,
content.
we retired our Facebook account
Mhm.
years ago because because antis, basically, that's the other thing, right? Like antis, anti-abortion, anti-sex ed, anti-trans people report your stuff as abusive. And then basically anything we put up just kind of went into that filter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are some other ones, but yeah, and somebody put sexetcetera.org in the chat, and I know Go Ask Alice out of Rutgers has been traditionally.
They've been there, they've been around almost about the same as we have. It's not all, it's more health content than sex ed content, but but good stuff is in there for sure.
Mhm.
Um, and then another question is asking about how to speak to Democratic Party members and candidates who might be pulling back on supporting social issues like LGBTQ. And I mean, I don't have a political strategy for you, but I just think that personally, I just think that this is a moral issue. It's a justice issue. For me, it's a religious issue, a religious justice issue. And I think that we need to keep it in front of our legislators. I really do.
I mean, I'm noticing in that question, the second one of the last sentences says that Trump's most effective ad of his campaign said, Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you. But here's the interesting thing, and look, I liked Kamala Harris. I want to be clear about that. But Kamala Harris's campaign could have come back and said, yeah, we are. And they didn't. They didn't. There's a lot of noise that's been made about how Democrats were too inclusive, but there was a resounding silence around queer and trans people in the last campaign. And quite frankly, if you ask me, that in fact was the problem. So this idea that Dems are so like there for us and that maybe they should pull back, they're not. They weren't. It was, I mean, this campaign in particular, Biden's campaign also, were so quiet around all of this. And I'd hearken back, and I know we're not in the same time, obviously, but the Obama campaign wasn't like that. Um, Clinton's campaign wasn't like that.
Yeah.
So I think we can look at successes, and the successes that we had were actually largely people who were really quite full-throated about
Yeah.
their
Mhm.
support for queer and trans people, and that's something we haven't been seeing. So if you ask me, we need to maybe go back.
Yeah.
There you go.
There was a quick question. Is your book available as an audiobook?
Fresh Hell is. The other books are not, but
Yeah, the other books, Heather.
CX is like a 400-page reference book. So
Yeah.
not
So
only would
this
y'all be
is
like real tired of listening to me by the end, it's just kind of not, I don't know that it really is going to work from front to back.
this one is SEX, the All You Need to Know Sexuality Guide to Get You Through Your Teens and 20s. And that's you have the second edition of that, or you don't have a third edition, do you?
That is the second, third is coming soon.
Great. And then we also have, wait, what? Which is this lovely it's kind of like a cartoon.
Comic.
Yeah, a comic guide to relationships, bodies, and growing up, illustrated by Isabella Rotman. There was a question about, you mentioned LGBTQ medicine. Is there a name for that field of study, or how would somebody find that medical specialty?
I can't really think of a name. I mean, I'm like, that's pretty much it, right? Like, that's pretty much what you would say. I mean, we're still also too, I mean, that's the other thing, even in fields that are made of queer and trans people, it's still very binary. It's still very gay and lesbian focused. It's still very cisgender focused, or when it's trans focused, very binary trans focused. And so a lot of the language, when you see that, will still say gay and lesbian. It can stand to be updated to
I
say.
wonder whether people, like, if the person who typed that question is looking for care for somebody that they're in their life, an adolescent medicine practitioner might be a place to start.
Mhm.
You might look at their website and see if they have affirming language on their website.
Mhm.
And if they don't, maybe they can make a referral, or maybe the local Pride Center can make a referral for
I
a
was
practitioner.
Also, I'm not remembering right now. Jessica Halem has started a gay and lesbian healthcare resource, right? So you can go and you can basically search for providers, and I'm completely forgetting the name of it, but I can search it up later.
If you
Right.
find it, Heather, we can put it in the resources that we send
Great.
out to
Great.
folks and also on, which also end up being underneath the YouTube video when it's put up on our YouTube channel.
Great. I will.
Somebody's made a comment that they think it's worth mentioning on the social media post that while trust needs to be earned when someone says you're safe with me, that they can be used as a starting point for possible non-judgmental friends. True. And I would also, I'm just going to also just double down and say that I think sometimes we see cisgender and heteronormative privilege at play with that, and people can unintentionally cause harm. So I'm not saying that you're not safe, but I'm saying that it's more, we need to do more than that. We need to do more than just say that we're a safe person on.
I think it's very similar to someone telling you they're an ally versus showing you that they're
Yeah,
an
Yeah.
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 I think that's what that is about. And then the last question that I see in our Q&A here is, are there Canadian resources you can direct us to?
ally. Oh no.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, yeah, it's again, this is one of these things God, please, everybody start your own stuff. I don't know what to say about that. But it's one of these things too, where, I mean, we work really hard to have a diverse team of people at Scarleteen, but ideally, and if you look also on Scarleteen, by the way, we have a resources section. We try and list as many outside resources that we think are great as we can. It's pretty well organized. So take a look around and you can find what we've found there because, ideally when somebody's looking for this kind of information or this kind of support, they have some choices. What if somebody just doesn't vibe with me or with us for some reason? They shouldn't have to be stuck with me because they don't have any other options. They should only choose me if they're like, I feel right with Heather, right? Like Heather feels like the right person for me. It shouldn't be like, well, I don't really like them, but I'm going to talk to them anyway because I don't have anything else.
Well, and also there are OWL programs in Canada. We have OWL facilitator trainers across Canada. So folks, even if you're not a Unitarian Universalist, you can look at the Canadian Unitarian Council and get connected to Our Whole Lives programming in your province.
Yeah. I think, there's a little conversation about United Church of Canada going on in the chat, and I'm giving you my email address, Carolyn, so you can email me because I'd love to talk more about that. I know that's just kind of been hit or miss with some of the things, and the CUC is pretty Canadian Unitarian Council is pretty involved with Our Whole Lives up there. So
I did see too that somebody just mentioned a Children's Hospital in Los Angeles doing trans care, and I will also say that too. That's a good point for resources, right? The children's hospitals that are still providing trans care for young people would also be good resources to go to for help, support, to send young people to, whether or not they need that health care. Those providers also usually keep a pretty good bank of resources.
Seattle Children's is another place. They have a gender care clinic that's
Mhm.
Yeah,
some
Children's
of those
Hospital of Pennsylvania as well.
some of those
Yeah.
places have had some really tough times
I was going to say
because
that's where we're at with Lurie in Chicago right now.
the threat to remove federal funding from it's not only the funding doesn't only not only that sounds dismissive, but it doesn't only affect the gender affirming care. It affects everything that the hospital is doing, and so it's a very large threat. So if you see hospitals um, pulling back on gender affirming care, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's their ideology.
Mm.
It's sometimes a matter of them surviving to live another day and provide that hopefully in the future
Yeah.
again.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, Heather, we've come to the end of our hour, and this has just been such a pleasure to have you join us and share your
Same.
wisdom with us. It's
Same.
always good to talk to you.
Yeah,
Too.
thank you so much. Folks, we are taking a summer break. There will not be a taking flight in July or August, but we'll be back in September with to be determined. So
And just for anybody who hasn't heard, the new editions of Our Whole Lives for grades 10 through 12 are out now in 3 editions. We have the secular edition, the OWL UU edition, and the OWL UCC edition. And those, just like the K through 1 edition, seamlessly integrate faith material into UU or UCC context. And of course, if you're working in a secular setting, you can just get the secular content if that suits your needs.
Yep. So we're so excited about that. It's been a long
And we have a field test coming up for the 3rd edition of 7 to 9. So we will be sharing that application shortly, but if you want to get on our waiting list for the field test, you can email owl@ucc.org or owl@ua.org.
And those materials somebody asked are available, any of the curriculum are available at uccresources.com or uuabookstore.org.
And one more note for the field test, 7 to 9 is going to be very different because instead of 25 workshops, it's 16 2-hour workshops because we're trying to respond to families that find the scheduling difficult.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Heather, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Heather. Love you.
Love you guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Bye.
great day.